They laughed at me because I'm poor. And then my sister's fiancé mentioned my plane. The zipper on my old leather jacket was hard to unzip in the cold lobby of the Golden Oaks restaurant as I stepped through the door to the evening that would change everything. Beyond the massive doors, I could hear the hum of voices, the clink of glasses, and that special laugh emitted by those confident in their own superiority. My fingers, accustomed to steering wheels and precision instruments, clumsily smoothed the wrinkled collar of my shirt. I knew what awaited me inside: contemptuous looks, caustic remarks, questions about my life, carefully wrapped in politeness. But I did not know that this evening would be the last in which my family would mistake silence for weakness. Before we begin the story of our new author, write in the comments where you are following us from. My name is Nathan Coleman, and I'm 43 years old. I'm tall and thin, with a short haircut and a scar above my left eyebrow, a shrapnel wound from an operation I kept secret. The lines around my eyes are deeper than they should be for someone my age, but each one is earned by hours spent in the cockpit at 40,000 feet, where the air is thin and mistakes cost lives. My skin is roughened by winds from different continents, and my hands are covered in calluses that don't fade even after months on the ground. I drive an old '98 Ford pickup truck with a dent in the rear fender and a radio that only picks up 2 stations. My apartment is a 1-bedroom studio on the outskirts of Springfield, where the neighbors don't ask unnecessary questions, and mornings smell of coffee from the 24-hour restaurant downstairs. My sister Allison had always been different, 5 years younger than me, with blonde hair, a perfect smile, and a knack for making people feel important. She worked as a sales manager for a major pharmaceutical company, Bristol Medical Group, earning well and never missing an opportunity to show off her talent. Her city center apartment was filled with designer furniture, and the walls were hung with abstract paintings she had bought at auction. Allison knew how to make an impression, and she reveled in it. Her fiancé, Marcus Harrington, was the pinnacle of her ambitions. A successful corporate lawyer from a family with money, connections, and a name that everyone recognized. Tall, well-groomed, with a neat beard and suits from Italian tailors, he spoke slowly, choosing his words as if he were weighing them on a golden scale. Marcus loved to talk about his clients, big deals, and private jet trips. He never asked about others. He only talked about himself. Our mother, Dorothy Coleman, was still a woman of steel and a sharp tongue at 68. She raised us alone after my father left when I was 14. She worked as an accountant, saved money to pay for our college, and spent her entire life dreaming of her children's success, the kind of loud, visible success you could brag about to the neighbors. Allison lived up to her expectations. I didn't, or so she thought. She never said she was disappointed, but her eyes said it all. When I showed up to family dinners in a jacket and old jeans, she would look at me as if I had reminded her of her failure. Uncle Roger, my mother's brother, was her complete opposite. Loud, cheerful, and the owner of a small chain of car washes called Shine and Drive. He took pride in every dollar he earned and believed that money was the only measure of success. Roger wore gold chains, drove a red Cadillac, and brought a bottle of expensive whiskey to every holiday, the price of which he always mentioned. He liked to tease me, tapping me on the shoulder and asking when I would finally buy a decent car. His wife, Aunt Gloria, would nod along with his words, smoothing her red-dyed curls and jingling her bracelets. I didn't fit into this picture. After school, I joined the Army, not because there were no other options, but because I felt I had to. Service in the infantry hardened me, taught me discipline, responsibility, and the ability to make decisions in situations where seconds mattered. Then came a recommendation. pilot training, and a transfer to the Air Force. Years of training, exams, flights over deserts, oceans, and mountains. I flew transport planes, fighter jets, and strategic bombers. I participated in operations that were not reported in the newspapers. I carried out missions that existed only in classified files marked top secret. My life was full of adrenaline, danger, and meaning. But to my family, it was simply military service, something noble but meaningless in their world, where only money and status mattered. The evening of the engagement was destined to be Allison's triumph. The Golden Oaks restaurant had been chosen deliberately. It was a place where politicians, businessmen, and those who wanted to be noticed dined. The room had high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and waiters in black vests who moved silently, like shadows. Our table was by the window, overlooking the city lights. Allison was resplendent in a champagne silk dress, and her engagement ring, with a pea-sized diamond, sparkled on her finger. Marcus stood beside her, holding her hand, occasionally leaning in to whisper something in her ear. His mother was smiling so widely that her face looked like it was going to explode. Uncle Roger had already ordered a second bottle of wine and was commenting loudly on each course. I sat at the edge of the table, between my cousin Danny, who had been staring at his phone all evening, and a distant relative whose name I couldn't remember. A plate of salad sat in front of me, barely touching it. Conversations flowed past me. Wedding plans, a honeymoon in the Maldives, the new house Marcus was planning to buy for his young family. I listened, nodded when necessary, and remained silent. Silence had always been my defense. In military circles, you're taught not to say too much, not to brag, not to reveal anything that might jeopardize the mission or your comrades. This habit had become a part of me, but my silence irritated my family. To them, it was a sign that I had nothing to boast about, nothing to say, nothing to present to the world. Uncle Roger was the first to disturb my peace. "Nathan, my friend," he turned to me, a glass in his hand, wine dripping over the edge. "Tell us, how are you? Are you still in the... what's that? Army?" I looked up. A wave of attention swept over the table. Allison stopped laughing at someone's joke. Mom froze, fork in hand. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me curiously. "In the Air Force," I replied calmly. "Still serving." "Oh yes, the BBC." Roger slapped his forehead theatrically. "And how's it going? Do they pay well?" I shrugged. "Enough, enough," he repeated, savoring the word. "That's not much, is it?" "Well, at least it's stable. That's important. You'll have a pension there, right?" "That's how it will be." I picked up my glass of water and took a sip. "Excellent." Uncle Roger turned to the others. "Stability is important. Not everyone is cut out to build an empire like Marcus. Some people are just doing their job, and that's okay." His words hung in the air. I didn't answer. Aunt Gloria leaned across the table. "Nathan, honey, do you still drive the same truck? That old Ford?" "On this one," I confirmed. She sighed and shook her head. "Oh my God, it's falling apart. Aren't you afraid to drive it?" "It's good." "Okay." He exchanged a look with Roger. "Well, everyone has their own standards." Allison intervened, trying to calm the situation. "Nathan is just modest. He never liked to brag." "Modesty is a good thing," my mother agreed, but her tone suggested otherwise. "But sometimes you have to show people what you've accomplished. Otherwise, they'll think you haven't accomplished anything." I looked at her. Her eyes were hard, filled with the disappointment she had carried with her for years. She wanted me to defend myself, to justify myself, to prove my worth. But I wasn't going to do that. "Maybe I just have nothing to show," I said, calmly. There was an awkward silence. Marcus cleared his throat, drawing attention. "You know, serving in the military is noble," he began, in a clear tone that left a but to follow. "But let's be honest, it's not the most lucrative career choice. I respect people who serve their country. But ultimately, you have to think about the future, about financial stability, about what you're going to leave behind." He spoke as if he were giving a lecture to students. I stared at him without blinking. "You're right," I said. "We need to think about the future." Marcus nodded, pleased that I agreed. "Exactly. For example, I'm currently working on a deal that will bring the company millions of dollars. This requires skills, knowledge, and connections. Do you understand what I mean?" "I see." I picked up the glass again and finished the water. Uncle Roger decided to add fuel to the fire. "Nathan, have you ever flown anything serious? Or do you just fly old transport planes?" Danny's cousin looked up from his phone. "He probably doesn't fly at all. He probably just sits in an office and fills out paperwork." Laughter, not loud but clear enough to sting. Allison blushed. "Guys, come on. It's my engagement party. Let's not—" "We're just kidding," Roger waved. "Nathan understands, right? He doesn't mind the jokes, does he, Nathan?" I didn't answer. Something in me was tightening, not with pain, but with fatigue. The fatigue of explaining, justifying, demonstrating things to people who didn't want to hear. I had lived a life they couldn't even imagine. I had flown into war zones, escorted aid convoys, evacuated the wounded under fire, delivered cargo on which the lives of hundreds of people depended. I had held the controls at times when the slightest mistake would have meant death, mine and those on board. But to them, it was just military service, something distant and unimportant. Dinner continued. The main course arrived. Steaks, fish, side dishes with sauces whose names I didn't know. Conversations returned to their usual course. Weddings, money, plans. I ate slowly, thinking that in an hour I could leave and return to my quiet apartment, where no one would judge me by the make of my car or the price of my jacket. But then something happened that changed the whole evening. Marcus finished his wine, leaned back in his chair, and smiled that arrogant smile I had come to hate. "By the way, a funny story," he began, addressing the entire table. "Last week I flew to Germany for work. The company chartered a military plane because it was an urgent trip. We landed at the military base in Ramstein, and while I was waiting for my car, I got to talking to an officer." He paused, savoring the attention. "And do you know what he told me?" No one answered. Marcus turned to me. "He mentioned your name, Nathan." I froze. The steak on my fork hung in the air. Mom frowned. "My name?" I asked softly. "Yes," Marcus nodded. "I was passing a hangar, and I happened to ask whose plane was parked there. It was a huge machine, by the way. The officer looked at me and said, 'That's Captain Coleman's plane.' At first I didn't understand, but then I asked, 'Coleman's?' 'Nathan Coleman's.' He confirmed it. The table fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Allison opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Uncle Roger stopped chewing. Mom looked at me as if I had suddenly spoken a foreign language. Marcus continued, now addressing me only. "I thought it was a mistake, but the officer was very confident. He said you were one of the trusted pilots for long-range military flights. strategic operations, secret missions. He even said you were considered one of the best. The silence was absolute. I slowly placed my fork on my plate. That isn't really true, I began. Really? Marcus raised an eyebrow. That was pretty specific. He said you fly strategic bombers and special purpose carriers, that you have high-level security clearance. Uncle Roger found the voice first. Wait, are you telling me that Nathan, our Nathan, flies military planes? Real military planes? I sighed. This was the conversation I wanted to avoid more than anything. I'm a pilot, I said simply. It's my job. Pilot, my mother repeated, her voice filled with disbelief. You never said you were a pilot? You didn't ask. Allison leaned forward. Nathan, why didn't you ever tell me? I looked at her. Because my job is not just about stories. I signed confidentiality agreements. Some things can't be discussed, not even with family. Marcus crossed his arms over his chest, but the officer obviously didn't consider it a secret. He said more than he should have, I replied. Maybe because you're a civilian and he decided it didn't matter, but it does to me. Aunt Gloria grabbed her husband's hand. Roger, did you hear? He flies planes. I heard, the uncle muttered, still digesting the information. Danny put the phone on the table. Wait a minute, so you're like a fighter pilot? Like in the movies? Not a fighter jet, I clarified. I fly different types of aircraft. Transport, strategic, special operations. It depends on the mission. Strategic, Marcus nodded slowly. That's impressive. His tone changed. It was no longer condescension, no longer mockery. There was something else in his voice now. Respect mixed with surprise. Mom was still looking at me, trying to understand what she had heard. But why didn't you ever tell us? Why didn't we know? I met his gaze. Because you never cared about what I really do. You only cared about how much I make, what kind of car I drive, what kind of house I have. But my job is not about the money. The words came out harsher than I had intended, but they were true. Mom paled. I've always been interested in your life. No, Mom, you were interested in what my life looks like from the outside. And those are two different things. An awkward silence fell. Allison tried to lighten the mood. Nathan is right. I never asked the right questions. I just assumed. Uncle Roger cleared his throat. Well, damn it, Nathan. You could have at least given me a hint. We were thinking... He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. They thought I was a failure, that I was languishing in a low-paying job, barely making ends meet, living in poverty. But in reality, I was doing what most people only dreamed of. Flying, serving my country, taking on responsibilities that weren't measured in dollars, but in lives. Marcus didn't give up on the subject. He was a lawyer, used to getting to the bottom of things. Tell me honestly, Nathan, that plane I saw, was it really assigned to you? I hesitated. On the one hand, I didn't want to turn my job into a spectacle for my family. On the other hand, lying would have been even worse. Technically speaking, I don't have a personal plane, I began slowly. But I do have aircraft that I fly regularly. They're assigned to my unit, and I'm one of the lead pilots. So yes, in a way, it's my plane. In the sense that I'm responsible for it when it's in the air. What guy? Danny asked, suddenly interested. I looked at him. His eyes were bright with curiosity. He used to think of me as a boring relative, someone you had to tolerate at family reunions. Now I was interesting. A Boeing C-17 Globemaster, I replied. A strategic military transport aircraft, capable of carrying cargo and people over a distance of over 10,000 kilometers without refueling. Aunt Gloria gasped. 10,000 kilometers? Sometimes more, I added. It depends on the load and the route. I've also flown a Lockheed C-130 Hercules, a medium-sized transport aircraft, and a few other aircraft that I can't talk about. Uncle Roger leaned forward, his face red with excitement. So you flew into combat zones? Yes. Where exactly? I shook my head. I can't discuss this. But have you been to dangerous places? Every place I'm sent is potentially dangerous. It's the nature of the job. Mom raised her hand to her lips, her eyes moistened. Oh my God, Nathan. I didn't know. I had no idea. That's exactly why I didn't tell you, I said more quietly, so you wouldn't worry. Allison reached across the table and shook my hand. You are a hero. I started. No, I'm just doing my job. Heroes are those who die doing their duty. I just survived. Marcus leaned back, studying me with new interest. How many years have you been in the Air Force? 19, I replied. 5 years in the military before that. 24 years of service total. And in all this time, you've never mentioned what exactly you do. There was no reason. No reason? Uncle Roger burst out laughing, but his laugh sounded different now. No longer mocking, but with a hint of admiration. Boy, you had a reason every day. You're just a quiet guy. Maybe, I agreed. The waiter brought dessert, tiramisu and panna cotta. No one touched it. The atmosphere at the table changed completely. Those who an hour ago had looked at me with pity or contempt now looked at me with curiosity and something resembling respect. I didn't like it. Respect based on a sudden discovery seemed false. If they didn't respect me before they found out about my work, then what was the point of their respect now? But I couldn't stop the flood of questions. Have you received any awards? Allison asked. Some. Which one? I sighed. Distinguished Service Medal, Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, Air Force Commendation Medal, and several others. Mom covered her mouth with her hand. You never showed them. They're in a box in the closet. Why don't you wear them? Why aren't you proud of them? I looked at her. I'm proud of them, but they're not for show. They're a reminder of the people I served with, of those who never came home. Silence fell over the table again, but this time it was different, heavy, gripped by the realization that they had understood nothing about my life all this time. Marcus cleared his throat. I have to apologize, Nathan. I said things, inappropriate things. I didn't understand. You shouldn't have understood, I replied. You judged by appearances. That's natural. No, that was wrong, he insisted. Your services are more than I will ever do. Don't compare, I said. We do different things, and your work is important. Society needs lawyers as much as it needs pilots. But my words rang hollow, and we both knew it. Marcus practiced corporate law, defending the interests of big companies, helping them circumvent the law and maximize profits. My job was to provide humanitarian aid to disaster areas, evacuate wounded soldiers, and support military operations that protected people. The difference was clear. Finally, Uncle Roger recovered. Nathan, I'm a complete idiot. All those jokes about your truck, about how you can barely make ends meet, I didn't know. You had no way of knowing, I said. I didn't let you know. But still, I should have, I don't know, shown more respect. I shrugged. Forget it. It doesn't matter. But it mattered to him. It mattered to everyone at the table. They suddenly realized that for years they had treated the man who deserved their respect as a loser. And that realization was painful. Allison was still holding my hand. Why didn't you ever defend yourself, Nathan? Why did you let us say these things? I met his gaze. His eyes were full of tears. Because it's not my job to prove my worth, I replied quietly. I know who I am. I know what I've done. I don't need others to validate me. But it hurts, she whispered. It hurts to hear people humiliate you. Sometimes, I admitted. But in military circles, you're taught not to respond to provocations. Not every insult deserves a response. Sometimes, the best response is silence. Mom wiped her eyes with a tissue. I'm a bad mother, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know about my own son's life. You're a good mother, I replied. You raised us all on your own. You worked tirelessly. You gave us everything you could. It's just that we measure success differently. For you, it was money and status. For me, it was service and responsibility. Neither approach is better than the other. They're just different. She shook her head but didn't answer. Tears were streaming down her face. Aunt Gloria suddenly asked, Have you ever been afraid during flights? I got to thinking. Yes, I was afraid. Fear is normal. It makes you cautious. It makes you check every detail, every device. But you don't let fear control you. You acknowledge it and move on. How are you dealing with him? Training, experience, trust in your team. I never fly alone. There's always a co-pilot, a navigator, and engineers. We trust each other with our lives. It's the only way to survive. Danny interrupted the moment with his question. Have you ever been criticized? I looked at him. His face was full of childlike enthusiasm. For him, it was an adventure story. For me, it was a memory that still made my stomach churn. Yes, I replied shortly. And what happened? We completed the task and returned to base. But how? Tell me more. I shook my head. Some things are better left in the past. He started to protest, but Allison stopped him with a look. Danny, don't push it. If Nathan doesn't want to talk, there's a reason. Danny pouted but kept quiet. I was grateful to my sister for her understanding. Dinner was coming to an end. The waiter brought the bill, and Marcus insisted on paying it himself. We began to pack up, put on our coats, and prepare to leave. But the atmosphere was completely different from earlier that evening. Now people were approaching me, shaking my hand, thanking me for my service. It was a strange and uncomfortable feeling. I wasn't used to this kind of attention. It was cold outside. The January wind bit through my bones. I zipped up my old leather jacket and shoved my hands in my pockets. My mother came up to me as the others were already heading for their cars. Nathan, she began, her voice trembling. Forgive me. I looked at her. In the light of the lanterns, her face looked older, the wrinkles deeper. She looked small, fragile, not the iron woman who always seemed indestructible. There's nothing to forgive, I said. There's a reason. I was blind. I only saw what I wanted to see. I wanted my children to be successful so badly that I didn't notice that one of them was already successful. Just not in the way I imagined. She hugged me. I couldn't remember the last time she had hugged me. Maybe when I was 12. I hugged her back, awkwardly. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "I'm so proud." "Thank you, Mom." He pulled back and wiped his eyes. "Come to dinner next week. Just you and me. I want to hear your stories. True stories." "I'll come," I promised. She nodded, kissed me on the cheek, and headed for her car. Allison followed her. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It was your evening. I couldn't resist coming. I know you felt uncomfortable, especially after all that talking." "Everything is fine." He hugged me tightly. "You're the coolest brother in the world, even if you're shy and quiet." I chuckled. "I'll try to keep up." Marcus came over and held out his hand to me. I shook it. "It was nice to meet you from a different perspective, Nathan." "The same. If you need help, legal or otherwise, call me, seriously." "Thank you." They left. Uncle Roger and Aunt Gloria waved goodbye, still looking confused. Danny yelled something about wanting to ride in a military plane. I smiled and nodded, knowing it was impossible, but not wanting to spoil his illusions. I was left alone in the parking lot. My old Ford sat in the far corner, next to shiny new sedans and SUVs. It looked pitiful next to them. Peeling paint, a dent in the fender, rust on the edges of the doors. But it was my truck, and it had never let me down. I opened the door and climbed in. The interior smelled of old leather and engine oil. I put the key in the ignition but didn't turn it. I stood there, staring into the darkness. The evening was strange. I hadn't intended to reveal my military service. I didn't want to make a spectacle of it, but Marcus had done it for me. Part of me was grateful. Now my family knew. Now they would stop judging me by my appearance. But another part was disappointed. Why did they have to know about my planes and medals and dangerous missions in order to respect me? Why wasn't it enough that I was an honest man doing his job? Why did respect have to depend on impressive details? I started the engine. It hummed its familiar thud. The radio turned on, and an old country song began to play. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed home. The road was deserted. The city was sleeping. The streetlights flickered in the window, creating a hypnotic rhythm. I thought about what awaited me the next day. A briefing at 7 in the morning, an aircraft inspection, perhaps a new mission. This was my reality, my world. A world where only competence, responsibility, and the ability to complete a task under any circumstances mattered. When I arrived at my apartment, it was past midnight. I climbed the stairs and opened the door. The room greeted me with silence and the familiar smell of coffee from the restaurant downstairs. I took off my jacket and hung it on a hook. The medals in the box in the closet remained untouched. I had no intention of taking them out. They were where they belonged, in the dark, away from the eyes of the world. I lay down on the bed, fully dressed. I closed my eyes. Images flashed through my eyelids. The sky at dawn, boundless and clear. Clouds under my wings. The sensation of weightlessness and power at the same time. Flying was my passion, my salvation. When I was in the air, all other problems seemed small and insignificant. Up there, at 12,000 meters, there were no family dinners, no caustic remarks, no judgmental glances. It was just me, the car, and the sky. The next few days passed as usual. Morning meetings, equipment checks, training flights. I threw myself into work, trying to forget about that strange evening in the restaurant. But my family hadn't forgotten. My mother called me the next day, inviting me to dinner, as she had promised. Allison texted me, asking how things were. Even Uncle Roger sent me an awkward text, apologizing. I replied briefly, politely, but without enthusiasm. Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland had been my home for nearly a decade. A vast expanse of land, hangars the size of football fields, runways that stretched to the horizon. It was home to Air Force One, presidential planes, and the most important military flights. I was part of an elite unit responsible for strategic airlift. Not everyone was qualified for this job. It took years of impeccable service, credentials, and security clearances. I had gone through it all and earned my place. My co-pilot, Major Kevin Daniels, was 8 years younger than me, but we had been flying together for 5 years. He was a tall African American with a big smile and a quick mind. He had grown up in Detroit, attended the military academy, and had dreamed of becoming a pilot since he was a boy. Kevin was one of the best I knew. Calm under pressure, precise in his calculations, reliable in crisis situations. We trusted each other implicitly. Wednesday morning, I was sitting in the cockpit of a C-17, checking systems before a training flight. The instrument panel was illuminated with dozens of gauges, the screens displaying fuel, altitude, and heading data. Kevin was jotting down something in his logbook, and I was checking the communications system. "How was dinner on Saturday?" he asked, without looking up from his notes. I chuckled. Interesting. I wonder if this is good or bad. Both. He looked up. Say. I briefly recounted the incident, the family's laughter, Marcus's mention of the plane, and how everything had changed. Kevin listened, nodding. "So they didn't know you were a pilot?" "No, I never went into details." "Why?" I shrugged. It didn't seem important. Kevin shook his head. "Man, your family considered you a loser for years, and you didn't think it was important to set them straight?" "I'm not a loser." "I know, but they didn't know." "Now I know." "And how are you feeling?" I got to thinking. It's weird. On the one hand, it's good that they finally understood. On the other hand, it's a shame that they needed such a reason to start respecting me. Kevin nodded. "I see. People judge by appearances. It's easier than digging deeper."
Yes.
We returned to the house. 20 minutes later, we were ready to take off. Kevin contacted the control tower and received clearance. I guided the plane down the runway, feeling the familiar tension in my body. Despite thousands of hours of flying, every takeoff was special. The moment of transition from ground to sky, from static to movement. The engines roared. I pushed the control stick forward slightly. The C-17 began to accelerate, picking up speed. The tape flickered under the wheels. The speed increased. 100, 150, 200 kilometers per hour. I pulled back on the stick. The nose of the plane rose. The landing gear lifted off the concrete. We were off. The sky greeted us with a clear light. Below, the base was getting smaller and smaller, turning into a collection of buildings and toy paths. We gained altitude and set the course. Kevin reported the parameters. Everything was normal. We were flying over Maryland, over forests and fields, over small towns and highways. From here, 10,000 feet up, the world seemed calm and orderly. "You know what I'm thinking?" Kevin suddenly broke the silence. "About what?" "That your family has never seen you here." I don't know what you look like at the helm. I don't understand what it means. Yes, they don't understand. Maybe we should show them. I looked at him. What do you mean? Invite them to the base. Give them a tour. Show them what you do. Let them see for themselves. This is forbidden. There are programs for civilians, open days, familiarization visits. Those can be arranged. I thought about it. The idea was tempting, but also terrifying. Showing my family my world meant revealing a part of me that I had kept hidden for years. Then again, maybe that was exactly what I needed. Maybe they really needed to see, not just hear. I'll think about it, I said. Kevin smiled. Think carefully. We continued our flight. An hour later, we returned to base and landed perfectly. We shut down the engines and completed post-flight procedures. When we disembarked, the squadron commander, Colonel James Wilson, was waiting for us in the hangar. The colonel was an old-school man, 62, gray-haired, straight-backed, and with a piercing gaze. He had served in the Gulf War, flying a B-52, and had been decorated with every medal imaginable. "Coleman, I have a task for you," he said without preamble. "Yes, sir." "We're flying to Germany in 3 days, Ramstein. We're delivering medical equipment and personnel. From there to Poland. We're evacuating wounded American service members home for treatment. The flight is classified. You'll get the details at the briefing tomorrow at 8 a.m. "I understand, sir." "Daniels will fly with you, standard crew." "Prepare." "Yes, sir." The colonel nodded and left. Kevin looked at me. "Germany, then?" "It seems so. Maybe you'll see that officer who was talking to your son-in-law." I chuckled. Unlikely, the base is huge, but fate decided otherwise. 3 days flew by. Briefings, preparations, cargo inspections. The medical equipment was essential. Portable X-ray machines, surgical kits, medicines. Everything was packed in special containers and secured according to regulations. There were 8 medical staff members, including 2 surgeons and 6 nurses. All were experienced, and everyone understood the importance of the mission. We took off early Saturday morning. The C-17 took off in the pre-dawn darkness, gained altitude, and headed east. The flight was expected to take about 8 hours, depending on the winds. I settled into the pilot's seat, adjusted the autopilot, and relaxed. Kevin dozed off next to me, leaning back. The rest of the crew went about their business. The flight was uneventful. Beautiful weather, clear skies, no problems. We crossed the Atlantic, over Ireland and the UK, and entered German airspace. The Ramstein controller gave us permission to land. We descended, entered the landing ramp, and gently landed the plane on the runway. The wheels touched the concrete with a slight squeal. The engines revved. We slowed and headed for the military terminal. The vast base spread out around us. Dozens of hangars, hundreds of aircraft, thousands of uniformed personnel. The unloading took 2 hours. The medical equipment was moved to a warehouse, and the personnel went to the barracks to rest. Kevin and I were given 4 hours of free time before the next stage. We went to the cafeteria, had a meal and drank coffee. Then we decided to take a walk around the base, to stretch our legs after the long flight. I was passing by the hangars when I heard a voice. "Captain Coleman?" I turned around. An officer, a captain, about 35 years old, with blonde hair, smiling. He looked familiar, but I couldn't identify him. "Yes, it's me," I replied. "Captain Brad Mitchell," he said, extending his hand to me. "We met 2 years ago at Striking Eagle. Back then you were flying a Hercules and transporting paratroopers. I shook his hand and my memory began to clear. Mitchell, exactly. I remember. You coordinated from the ground. Exactly, he nodded. Nice to see you again. What brings you to Ramstein? Medical delivery. Then we fly to Poland to pick up the wounded. A noble mission, he looked at Kevin. Major Daniels, if I'm not mistaken. Kevin nodded. Good memory. Mitchell chuckled. I remember good pilots. By the way, Captain Coleman, I recently met a relative of yours. I frowned. A relative? Yeah, some lawyer. Marcus Harrington, I think. He was on a charter flight and we started talking. He asked me about your plane and I told him a little bit. I hope I didn't say too much. I shook my head. No, everything's fine. I'm just surprised you met him. What a small world, Mitchell remarked philosophically. He seemed like a nice guy. He said he was going to marry your sister soon. Yes, the engagement was last week. Congratulations. Well, I won't hold you back. Have a nice flight. We said our goodbyes. Kevin looked at me, grinning. So, it's the same officer. It seems so. An interesting coincidence. Very interesting. I shook my head. But what can you do? The world really is a small place. We returned to the plane. An hour later, we loaded up stretchers and medical equipment to transport the wounded, and took 2 military medics on board. We flew to Poland, to a base near the Ukrainian border. 18 wounded soldiers were waiting for us there, some with shrapnel wounds, others with fractures, and one with a serious spinal injury. They were carefully placed in the cabin, and the doctors hooked them up to monitors and IVs. I felt the weight of responsibility. These people were counting on me. Their lives depended on how smoothly I flew the plane. The return flight was tense. I flew the plane with extreme caution, avoiding turbulence and choosing the optimal altitude. Kevin monitored the wounded by intercom. The doctors reported every 15 minutes. One soldier, Private Tommy Anderson, 19 years old, with a stomach wound, began to lose consciousness over the Atlantic. The doctors fought to save him, and I increased speed, squeezing everything I could out of the plane. We landed at Andrews Air Force Base 20 minutes early. Tommy was taken to the hospital and survived. I later learned that those 20 minutes saved his life. After such a mission, I always felt a sense of emptiness mixed with satisfaction. An emptiness because of the stress, because of the burden of responsibility. A satisfaction because I had done something important, something significant. I returned to the apartment late at night, threw myself into bed without undressing, and slept for 12 hours straight. On Monday, my mother called again. This time I answered. "Nathan, you promised to come to dinner," she reminded him. I remember. I was just on a business trip. In Germany? I was surprised. "How do you know?" Allison said. "Marcus mentioned seeing you there." "Not me. An officer who knows me." "Whatever. Come over tonight. I'll make your favorite, meat casserole." I couldn't refuse. That evening I went to see her. She lived on the outskirts, in a little house with a garden that she had bought many years ago. The house was neat, comfortable, full of memories. This is where Allison and I grew up. This was where our childhood rooms were. This is where my father left on a rainy night, slamming the door. My mother greeted me in the hallway and hugged me tightly. The air was filled with the smell of casserole and fresh bread. The table was set for 2. We sat down and she put the food on. We ate in silence for a while. Then she spoke. "I thought a lot after that dinner. I chewed and listened. I was thinking about what kind of mother I was, what values I instilled in you. I always thought that money was a measure of success. That if you don't have expensive things, it means you haven't succeeded in life. That's what he taught you, I said softly. Yes, my parents grew up poor. They fought for every dollar. For them, wealth was a dream, a purpose, the meaning of life. They passed that on to me. And you passed it on to us. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. But I was wrong, Nathan. Success isn't about money. Success is about doing something that matters. You save lives. You serve your country. That's true success. I put down my fork. Mom, don't blame yourself. You gave us everything you could. You worked tirelessly so that we didn't lack for anything. And that's what matters. But I didn't see you. I didn't understand who you really were. Now you understand. That's important. He wiped his eyes with a tissue. Tell me about your life, the real life, not the one I imagined. And so I told them. I told them about my first flight, the moment I realized this was my calling, about the training that drained me completely but made me stronger, about the comrades I served with, those who died and those who stayed, about missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, Africa, places where war was real, not just an image on TV, about the moments of fear when it seemed you wouldn't survive, and the moments of triumph when everything turned out perfectly, about the wounded I evacuated, the humanitarian aid I provided, how it felt to know that your work was saving lives. My mother listened without interrupting me. Sometimes she asked questions. Sometimes she just nodded. When I finished, it was too late. She took my hand. Thanks for sharing. Thank you for listening to me. I want you to know that I have always loved you, even when I didn't understand, even when I seemed disappointed. Love is not dependent on understanding. I know, Mom. He kissed me on the forehead like in childhood. You're a good man, Nathan, the best I know. I left with a warm feeling in my chest. Something had changed between us. Not everything, but something important. We started to understand each other. The next few weeks went by in the usual rhythm. Flights, training, debts. Allison called regularly, asking how things were going, telling me about the wedding preparations. The wedding was scheduled for May, at a large country hotel, with 300 guests expected. He wanted me to be the best man. I agreed, although the thought of standing in front of a crowd of people in suits terrified me. In March, I got 2 weeks off. My first real vacation in 3 years. I had planned to spend it quietly, relax, read, maybe go fishing. But Allison ruined my plans. Nathan, I have a favor to ask of you, she said into the phone. Which one? Marcus wants to get to know you better. He feels awkward after that dinner and wants to correct his impression. They don't have to fix anything, but he wants to. We were thinking, maybe you could spend the day with him? Show him what you do? He's really interested. I hesitated. Allison, I can't just bring a civilian onto a military base. What if we organized an official visit? You said there were programs for civilians. I remembered my conversation with Kevin. Indeed, the base held open houses for military relatives several times a year. Applications were accepted. I'll see what I can do, I said. Thanks, brother. That means a lot to me. I contacted the public relations office and explained the situation. The communications officer, Captain Linda Rodriguez, was understanding. We're planning a visit for military families in 2 weeks, she said. We could include your family. How many people? I thought. Maybe 6 or 7. Mom, sister, her fiancé, uncle and his wife, maybe a cousin. No problem. Fill out the form and send us the security checklists. We'll arrange everything. We sent out invitations. Everyone accepted. Even Uncle Roger, who was usually busy on weekends, canceled his plans. The interest was enormous. The day of the visit dawned bright and sunny. I met them at the main gate of Andrews Air Force Base. Mom arrived in her old Honda, Allison and Marcus in her black Mercedes, Uncle Roger and Aunt Gloria in a red Cadillac, and Danny arrived on a motorcycle. Captain Rodriguez checked their documents and issued them passes. We went through the security checkpoint. The base made a special impression on them from the first minute. The vast terrain, impeccable order, military equipment everywhere. The soldiers in uniform moved with precision and discipline. Everything emanated power, seriousness, and the importance of what was happening. I led them to the hangar where my C-17s were based. Along the way, I showed them other aircraft, F-16 fighter jets, Black Hawk helicopters, and tanker planes for refueling. Danny couldn't take his eyes off it, constantly pulling out his phone to take pictures. Aunt Gloria exclaimed oohs and ahs. Marcus walked silently, but I could see the respect in his eyes. I arrived at hangar number 7. The enormous doors were open. Inside, illuminated by floodlights, was my plane, a Boeing C-17 Globemaster, a gray behemoth with a wingspan of 52 meters, a length of 53 meters, and a height of 17 meters. 4 turbofan engines, each producing 40,000 pounds of thrust. A lifting capacity of 77 tons. A machine capable of carrying tanks, helicopters, and hundreds of men. A machine I had spent thousands of hours in the sky with. Everyone froze. Mom put her hand to her lips. Allison grabbed Marcus's hand. Uncle Roger whistled. "Wow," Danny whispered. I approached the plane and put my hand on the fuselage. The metal was cold and smooth. "This is my work tool," I said simply. "A tool?" Marcus asked. "It's a marvel of engineering." "Yes, but to me it's a tool, a means to accomplish a task." Kevin came out of the hangar, saw us, and came towards us. "Hello, folks. Major Kevin Daniels, Captain Coleman's co-pilot." I introduced everyone. Kevin shook my hand and smiled broadly. "Would you like to come in?" he suggested. Danny nodded so vigorously that I feared for his neck. We climbed the ramp into the hold, a vast space big enough to hold tanks or 250 soldiers. It was empty now, the walls echoing. I led them into the cockpit. The cockpit was cramped, full of instruments, screens, and levers. 2 seats for the pilot, seats for the navigator and the mechanic. Everything seemed complex and yet functional. I sat in the pilot's seat and felt the familiar comfort. This was my place, my space. "Is this where you control this machine?" Marcus asked. "From here," I confirmed. "How do you remember all this?" I put my hand over the side. Years of training, hundreds of hours in simulators, thousands of hours of real flights. At some point, it becomes second nature. You don't have to think about which button to press. Your hands move on their own. Mom leaned over and looked into the cabin. "It seems so complicated." At first, yes. But once you understand the system, it gets easier. Danny asked, "Can I sit down?" I nodded. He sat respectfully in the co-pilot's seat. Kevin showed him the main instruments, explaining their functions. Danny listened, holding his breath. For him, this was an adventure, a dream. I envied his enthusiasm. I had once been just like him when I was just starting out. I spent over an hour on the plane. I showed them everything. The cargo hold, the cargo securing systems, the medical unit for evacuating the wounded, the toilets, even the crew bunks on long flights. They asked me a million questions, and I answered them patiently. I felt like they were starting to understand the scale of my job, the complexity, the responsibility. After the plane, we went to the base museum. There were historical planes on display, photos of legendary pilots, and examples of uniforms from different eras. I told stories I knew, shared facts. They listened attentively, asked questions. Time flew by. We arrived at the mess hall by lunchtime. I led them to the officers' mess hall, where Colonel Wilson greeted us. He was in a good mood, joking with my family and telling us a few anecdotes about my early days in the squadron. Everyone was laughing. My mother was smiling in a way I hadn't seen her in a long time. Proudly, warmly. After lunch, Colonel Wilson invited us to the observation deck. From there, we had a view of the runway. Just then, a transport plane took off. The enormous machine accelerated, lifted, and soared into the sky. The roar of the engines was deafening. The ground shook. Allison covered her ears with her hands. Marcus watched without blinking. Danny filmed with his phone. "Is that how you take off every time?" Mom asked. "Every time," I confirmed. "It's scary. At first. Then you get used to it." Colonel Wilson turned to my family. "I want you to know that your Nathan is one of the best pilots I know. In 19 years of service, he has not had a single serious incident. No mistakes that cost lives. His service record is impeccable." Mom cried. Allison hugged me. "I have the coolest brother in the world." I patted her clumsily on the back. "You're exaggerating." "No, I'm not exaggerating." Uncle Roger approached and held out his hand. "Nathan, I was rude. I'm sorry." I shook his hand. "It's okay, Uncle Roger." "No, that's not right. I judged you without knowing anything. It was unfair. Let's forget about it." He nodded, but I could see it was important to him. He was carrying the blame, and he needed to get rid of it. I understood the feeling. The visit ended late in the evening. I walked them to the gate. Everyone thanked me and promised to see me soon. Mom hugged me goodbye and whispered, "Thank you for showing us your world. Thank you for wanting to see him." They left. I stayed at the base, returning to my duties. But something had changed. Now my family knew not only what I did, but how I did it. They had seen my plane, the cockpit, my comrades. They had met Colonel Wilson, heard his words. Now their respect was based not on abstract information, but on real experience. And that changed everything. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to stay up to date with our new audio stories.